What's up, brother?
How you doing today?
I'm blessed, and you?
Man, doing well, doing well. You in Toledo or what city you in?
I'm in Toledo right now.
Okay, cool then. Well, yeah, man. Well, thank you so much for being on the YouKnowDessie show. I really appreciate you. I admire a lot of the work that you do from your company and the tech world, and also with Afro Tech. So thank
Appreciate
you
it.
so much. Uh,
Thank you very much.
yeah. So for the viewing audience who may not know who you are and what you do, please tell them.
Yeah, so I am the brand manager for Afro Tech, which is the largest Black tech digital platform and conference in the world. So I'm responsible for like all the content, video production, video content, the podcast, which we just launched about 3 weeks ago, Black Tech Green Money, and the overall direction of the brand of Afro Tech. Alongside that, I have full service marketing production agency in Ohio, which we focus on creating content and strategies to reach and engage diverse audiences, multicultural audiences, um, husband and father.
Cool. Well, yeah.
Yeah.
So talk about your start, obviously in marketing and branding. So is this something that you always wanted to do coming up, or did you fall into it, or how did that?
Yeah. So I got off in like I wanted to be in the music business, which is almost every black kid, these wants to be in the music business. And so I started off playing the drums in church, which I wanted to be a songwriter and producer. So I when I was in a senior in high school, I figured, being from Toledo, like the closest thing to the music business was the radio station. So I got an internship at the local radio station with my goal of ultimately trying to just navigate my way into the music business.
Mhm.
And so I just happened to be pretty good at radio. I was the number one radio DJ in the city for several years in a row. And then took the leap on myself of, moving to Atlanta
Mhm.
to pursue my musical dreams. I had a friend down there who was in the music business. He was an engineer in studios down there. And he let me come live with him during the time I was working in radio, kind of jumping backwards a little bit. I always knew I wanted to work for myself. Again, I just thought I was going to be in the music business.
Yeah.
I was on that time I was in the radio. I was in a clothing store locally, and they were playing FM radio over their sound system.
Mhm.
So inevitably, the commercials come on over the sound system in the store,
Right.
and one of their competitors came on the air inside their store. I'm looking around like, this don't make a lot of sense. And so I'm like, they need their own radio station that just talks about them.
Yeah.
And so it was an idea I had, like a really good idea. So but I put it on the back burner because I was chasing my musical dreams.
Yeah.
So jumping back forward to moving to Atlanta, my favorite producer at the time, still my guy, was Brian Michael Cox.
Mhm.
And I didn't know this when I moved down there, but the studio that the guy I went to live with, the studio he worked at was Brian's studio.
Yeah.
And so I moved down there in 2 weeks. I'll actually tell you a really interesting story. So I'm just, new blood down in Atlanta trying to figure out life. Been down there for 2 weeks. And so Brian had a studio in the back of what is present day Stankonia, which is
Mhm.
Outcast Studio.
Yeah.
And previously Stankonia was Bosstown, Bobby
Mhm.
Brown's studio,
Yeah.
which is where my friend worked. And so this was days Whitney Houston was still alive. Bobby and Whitney were still together. And so I have just gotten down to Atlanta. I've been there for 2 weeks. And Whitney Houston is recording in a studio that's behind Stankonia, present day Stankonia, former day Bosstown.
Yeah.
And so everybody's kind of like in a buzz because, Whitney Houston is outside. Right.
Right.
And so Bobby comes up to the studio, which is his old studio, and to see just what's going on in his old stomping ground. So I go to my friend who's an engineer at this studio, plays some records because he wants to get into production also and not just be an engineer.
Absolutely.
And so he plays Bobby some records. I go to the corner of the room, being 2 weeks into Atlanta, wanting to be a songwriter, and I start writing to the song that Bobby is just like vibing out to.
Yeah.
And so Bobby walks over to me and he's like, what did you write? And so I sing him what I wrote, and he took my paper, went into the booth and sang what I just wrote.
Oh,
And I'm
wow.
like, I'm just like, I just moved to Atlanta, so I'm like, anything is possible, So this is a really interesting like side by story. So I had to tell that. So
No.
the marketing aspect of that. So I put this idea of live streaming radio on like the back burner because I was chasing that dream. So after 2 years of like just beating my head over, I did have some successes out of that. I have a song on Bobby Valentino's album Special Occasion, which is certified gold today,
Yeah.
which is something that I can say I got out of that experience, other than the Bobby record, which never came out. And another record that I produced by this rapper on Jive, which never came out, but I did get checked for that though. Um, but after 2 years of kind of just trying to figure out how to break into this industry that I'm so close to, but just trying to make it,
Yeah.
came back to the Midwest, got back on the radio, and decided to go ahead and pursue this dream of this live radio station. So
Mhm.
a mentor of mine at the time owned 6 McDonald's restaurants.
Okay.
And so I told him my idea of, I had this idea of walking in a clothing store and, having custom live radio. And he's like, do it. And so he helped me figure out a way of getting my first customer, which was a McDonald's restaurant down in Cincinnati, Ohio. And to more directly answer your question, how I got into marketing so if you do like one thing well, I've recognized in business, people will give you more opportunities to do more stuff because it's so hard to find good, credible people.
Right.
And so the operators who would ask, for our music, our live streaming radio, which we call McDonald's radio, because in between the songs, we talked about McDonald's,
Yeah.
will say, well, can you do our TVs too?
Yeah.
And so that turned into doing the TVs in the stores. And then that turned into producing things for those TVs, to custom content.
Yeah.
So today, Creadio, which started Creative Radio because we
Okay.
started doing radio,
Right.
is now a full production agency. So we do everything from video production, website development, communication strategy, design, and et cetera, because that live custom streamed radio brought on the opportunity for us to do other stuff.
Yeah, and I love the stories. It shows a couple of things. One, being versatile and being open and available for opportunities. And
Yeah.
then the other thing is that my background is radio. I used to work for Tom Joyner. I used to be Tom's assistant over at Reach Media Radio One, and then I actually started in music as well, and that's how I got into marketing and branding because I used to produce and actually do music, but it was like, okay, how do I get it out? And especially the internet, you had to meet people, you had to figure out if you were going to get posters and CDs,
That's right.
thing like that. So that's kind of where I started my journey as well. But yeah, that's definitely really dope. So going back to McDonald's radio and everything like that. So as these opportunities grow and get larger and larger, how did you kind of navigate on which direction to kind of take your agency? And because you always have to
Yes.
lead something.
No, for sure. It's, there's a real business fundamental that I'll come to in a second, but Steve Jobs has this quote where he says, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You
Mm-hmm.
can only connect them looking backwards. And what I took from that quote was I didn't know why I was doing, radio
Yeah.
because I wanted to be in the music business. I didn't know why I was doing, this live stream radio for, restaurants and retail. Because again, I wanted to be in the music business. But what I recognized that radio experience gave me the opportunity to continue to get good at my angle into the industries that I wanted to work in. Again, I wanted to be in the music business, a songwriter and producer. God had other plans for me,
Yeah.
and so I feel like everything that I did then now makes sense because that radio experience led me to doing my own podcast.
Yeah.
Which Of 10 Podcasts, which at the time when I launched it, after a few months, it was like the #1 Black tech podcast in iTunes.
Mm-hmm.
And so I forgot what your question was, but I'm just like talking now.
Oh, yeah.
And so I feel like, it was, you asked me about like business and opportunities. So I feel like they're really just core business fundamentals. So I had to look at what part of our business was growing the fastest and where our margins were. And for me, doing like the McDonald's radio opportunity was always about, it was a loss leader because McDonald's, because they're this big Goliath of a company, they want a lot for very little,
Yeah.
right? So, and they have the buying power to demand that. And so I felt like if I can get enough McDonald's restaurants, then that would help me build a significant business. So what I found was that McDonald's, having them as a client, just got me in the door to
Hmm.
other businesses that were more lucrative. And
Absolutely.
so if I could say, we have McDonald's restaurants as our clients, other
Yeah.
people are more willing to listen
Absolutely.
to my pitch. And so I realized after a couple of years of trying, to build that business inside of McDonald's that um, this was probably more wise for me to use this as an opportunity to navigate into bigger opportunities for us.
Yeah.
And live streaming radio in the way that we provided it was a really good business. We still do it today,
Yeah.
13 years, 14 years. But it helped us to figure out, okay, video is actually way more lucrative.
Hmm.
And that's where the world was going.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And you mentioned a couple things that were great about it, and I also looked at some of your past videos as well on like how to book guests for podcasts,
All right. Yeah.
and it's kind of the same concept that you use with the McDonald's, which is when you get one guest, you use one guest to get
That's right.
credibility, and then you can get more guests based off of that. So
Yeah, that's right. A lot of people get like strategy wrong, and I'll kind of synopsize, if that's a word, that video you're talking about is a lot of people will think, if I can just get Dessie on my show will be the biggest show in the world. And
yeah.
so they spend all day long trying to go get the big fish.
Mhm.
And that's not how you succeed. How you succeed is by getting people who are credible in their industry, credible clients, and et cetera, people that are respected
Yeah.
in their vertical.
Mhm.
And if you can get enough of those, if I can say I got Dessie on my show, if I can say I got, Bill on my show and Susie on my show and Jane on my show, and they're respected by the big fish that I want,
Mhm.
I can, after I get those, then I can go to those folks, say, look at all the people who have been a part of my ecosystem.
Absolutely.
And that gives and that person's like, yo, I respect Bill. I respect Dessie. I respect, these folks. And so now they want to be a part of it
Hmm.
because you've not only not waited for them to say yes,
Yeah.
but you've been about that action, doing your work and not waiting and getting credible people who they don't mind being in the company of.
Yeah, and sometimes you can use, and that's the same strategy that I use to get a lot of people as well, because sometimes those big fish are super busy, and at the end of
Mhm.
the day, you want to be on the radar. So it's like you might can't get the lead actor, but you get the supporting actor, and then you have the lead actor. I'm sure they're going to check in, or they're going to ask what's
That's
going
right.
on, or even feel like they got them. They didn't ask for me. You know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
it's one of those mind things.
Yeah. I mean, so I like my podcast. When I started Of 10 podcast, like nobody knew my name
Yeah.
in tech. But what I did was, again, I used that strategy, which I didn't even realize it was a strategy when I
Hmm.
did it. But I got people who I respected and who I knew big names in
Yeah.
tech. So like Mac and Day at the Egbo, like nobody, like people like don't really know Mac and Day, but Mac and Day was like a really good friend of Mark Zuckerberg.
Hmm.
And so he was one of the early engineers at Facebook. And so after I got Mac and Day to say yes, other people in tech, who were bigger names said yes, because I'm like, and they knew who Mac and Day
Yeah.
was, but like the general public didn't know.
Yeah.
And so I used that strategy to get like Michael Seibel in my first season. I think it was like episode 4 of the first season. Michael Seibel was the president of Y Combinator, for those who don't know.
Yeah.
And I had sent Michael probably, 6 emails, like trying to get him on there. But every time I sent him a new email, I said, this is who also we got to say yes since the last time I spoke to you.
Uh-huh.
And so yeah.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you mentioned, getting experts from different fields, and that's because like um, what I'm working on is like an entire podcast network, right? And so many people when they try to start a podcast, they want to go like general market, they want to talk pop culture or whatever it is may be. But I feel like you should be a lot more like selective and try to pick like a commonality about your podcast, so that way people can know exactly what it is, and you can get,
Mhm.
but you can get a lot further. Like if you had a podcast talking about pop culture, and you wanted to listen to it, you're pretty much just going to listen to the one that has the biggest name, or somebody that you respect. But if you were going into the liquor industry with a podcast, and I said the name like a Ken Austin. So Ken Austin is the guy that did the deal with Mark Cuban and Avion Tequila, and now he's got Proper 12 with Conor McGregor. So in that industry, he's very, very well known. But outside, nobody may not necessarily know him like that. But if I can get those people, now I can get ads based off of that. I can get more guests based off of that. Just being more,
Yeah.
market.
Yeah, and I'm about like, what can you monopolize
Mm-hmm.
on top of that? So so how I think about that is number one, I agree with you, like, going super duper niche.
Mm-hmm.
And what you want to do is pick a niche that will be bigger later.
Yeah.
So you want to be the person who owns that conversation very early. So it's very difficult to now start, let's see, a black tech podcast because people are doing that. And I'm just making that up, but you can pick this, pick any vertical
Right.
that everybody's talking about. To your point, pop culture. There's a million pop culture podcasts or video shows or YouTube channels or etc. But what if you picked to specialize in this, indie band that is definitely going to be, the wave
Yeah.
a year from now,
Mm-hmm.
and you've built over that year the biggest content library, the biggest podcast of that, very small fan base, and you become, when they do ultimately blow up,
Yeah.
the de facto personality who is the, person to be the industry, a thought leader
Right.
in this vertical, because you were doing this when nobody else was doing it.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting for folks to try to tackle something that everybody else is talking about, because that's where the wave is.
Mm-hmm.
But what you want to do is catch the wave before it's the wave.
Yeah. And Dame Dash would say, you should hustle on an empty block, basically.
Yeah, yeah, and hope, and then, but like knowing that block is ultimately going to be where people are going to be one day.
Yes.
So yeah, so you just got to be able to read markets, and it doesn't take genius to do this. It just takes some thought.
Right.
Like what is their small audience for that ultimately there will be a big audience for? So I look at, like, K-pop, which I don't listen to, but
Yeah.
K-pop, I started hearing that term, 5 years ago, 6 years ago. So what if you were the guy who, started the content channel on K-pop 5, 6, 7 years ago? Now you would be one of the biggest names. You would be the new,
Mm-hmm.
big boy. You would be the new Big Breakfast Club. You would be the new Ryan Seacrest, because you caught that wave early.
Yeah.
And so it just takes a little bit of thought and doubling down on what your real interests are versus, again, where the wave is today.
Yeah, and that's how I look at esports. So with the pandemic
Mhm.
slowing everybody down, now esports is getting that, some of that spotlight. But if you've been in the business, you've been knowing that esports were on their way, long before now. And so,
Right.
like, if you're not in the right position or connected to the right people in esports, then it could be a little bit.
Yeah, and part of the reason I believe why people don't take advantage of this strategy is because it's not, you don't get big numbers in the beginning. And so people are looking for likes, and they're looking for hearts, and they're looking for things, and they don't realize what ultimately you want is to be historically correct, right? And so what you want, you're setting yourself up for the prize later. We live in a very instantaneous society, and so it is discouraging for a lot of people to continue doing that work when their podcast might have, I'm making this up, but their podcast might have 30 downloads.
Yeah.
But if you're consistent and you're doing something that's interesting, something that's unique and creative, and you believe that this is going to be ultimately big, then that's the diligence it takes to stay on that road.
Yeah, absolutely. So talk about connecting with Blavish and Afro Tech. Tell me about how that.
Yeah. So I got introduced to Afro Tech after the first year. And so what happened was I was already doing my podcast, Of 10 podcast. And so actually, for this to make sense, I got to tell you Of 10 podcast. So Of 10 podcast is a podcast I did because I had an advisor at a startup that I was running at the time. He was a white guy, and he was like, what would it take to get more black kids interested in tech? And I said, well, they need to see like a black Mark Zuckerberg, somebody who looks like them and is realizing success. And at the end of that conversation, I kicked myself because I'm like, yo, we got super successful black people in tech. We just don't know who they are. They don't get the pub, right? And so I kicked myself and I was like, let me do something about that because I had, again, this extensive radio background.
Yeah.
And so I said, I'm going to do a podcast that just features like the biggest black names in tech. And this is before like Afro Tech was like a website. And this was, again, the first year of the conference, which I didn't know at the time, but it was the first year of the conference, like 300 people were there that year. And so it was, again, it was an inflection point for a conversation that I got early on that I didn't realize I was getting early on.
Yeah.
And so it just happened in that way for me. But so I did, it's called the Of 10 podcast because I was only going to do 10 episodes, 1 of 10, 2 of 10, 3 of 10. So it's called the Of 10 podcast.
Yeah.
So at the end of that 10 episodes, I was going to call it quick step because I was trying to get my startup going. So I got other things to do. I'm not trying to be a podcaster.
Yeah.
And so the response was such that it would have felt like to me, a disservice to the community to say, we got all these dope black people in tech and I'm only going to show you 10 of them.
Right.
Right. And so after the first season, I started getting all this hit up on Twitter. It's like, yo, when season 2? And I'm like, it ain't no season 2. Like, that's it. And so, but again, like the response was there. The demand was there for more episodes. So 5 seasons in, and after showing all these remarkable people in tech, last year I get actually let me go back. So I went to year 2 because I realized after year 1 that everybody I had interviewed on my podcast was on the stage at Afro Tech that first year. And I'm like, how did I not know that this thing was even happening?
Yeah.
And so I said, I'm gonna never miss another conference. So I went to year 2 and somebody keeps texting me. So I went to year 2 and had an amazing time. And I knew I was going to have an amazing time. So I vlogged every day of that conference. So it's still up on my YouTube today. So if you go to my YouTube, you'll see me vlogging every day of that conference. So by the end of, let's say if it was Friday and Saturday, which I don't remember. It might have been Thursday, Friday, Saturday. I don't remember. But at the end of the day on Friday, I would go back to my hotel and chop up that video and publish that night.
Yeah.
And so people on Saturday saw all my content from the night before, which was a really good video. And they like, yo, we just saw your video from yesterday. So I was pumping out content like super duper fast and it was quality. And so same thing on Saturday. I vlogged all day Saturday, chopped it up that night, and it was on that night on YouTube.
Yeah.
And so Sunday, before I dipped out of San Francisco, people were stopping me. It's like, yo, I saw your video. Like, that's, amazing that you was chopping it up that fast.
Yeah.
And so I did that, which was 2017. That was the second year. I went back in 2018, and I didn't vlog that year because I spent so much time like documenting the first year that I went that I didn't like really enjoy it because I was like trying to get content. But I had built a name for myself based on that first year of content. So people knew who I was. And so I would walk around in 2018, people like, yo, like you ain't vlogging, I'm like, nah, I'm just trying to enjoy myself. But having that vlogging experience on top of the podcast, which I continue to do. So actually it was funny. I'm just thinking about this now. When I went, it might've been year 1, but for sure year 2, I was the only guy there, like passing out like flyers that had nothing to do with the party that night.
Yeah.
And so I was passing out flyers like of check out my episodes of this podcast featuring the people who are going to be on stage here.
Oh, that's dope.
Right. And so went there with like 1,000 of these flyers, was just passing them out. And it wasn't a club night. It was check out my podcast that features so and so who's going to be on stage today. So I built out a name for myself in that way.
Yeah.
And so actually it was crazy. I took my wife with me to 2018 because I'm like, you got to see this.
Yeah.
Like, it's amazing to be in San, and I've been in San Francisco a lot, and you don't see black people in San Francisco. And I'm like, to be in San Francisco with like year two was like 700 black people at Afro Tech that year.
Mm-hmm.
And I took my wife. And I was like, you got to see like all these black people all in tech. I've never been in a room like this before with everybody who looks like you and is trying to make it in this industry.
Right.
And the energy was just incredible. So I took my wife. I was like, you got to see this. So I took her in 2018. And so at the end of the conference, she's like, this was remarkable, fantastic, beautiful, and whatever. So I'm like, but she said, if you come back again, like, you can't just be an attendee. You need to be on stage.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, like, so I'm like,
that's a challenge.
Challenge accepted.
Yeah, put that battery in your back.
I'm like, challenge accepted. So I'm like, planning all through that, because I have like November. So I'm planning all that time to apply to be a speaker.
Yeah.
And not knowing if I would qualify as a speaker. But I'm just like, I'm at least put myself out there and apply. And so around the time that the applications went up to apply to be a speaker, I got an email saying, I'm gonna make this brief, but I got an email saying, hey, we're working on a strategy for Afro Tech, and Morgan said we should reach out to you about leading it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I went from not knowing if I qualified to be on stage as a speaker to being asked to handle the entire brand strategy. So it was a blessing in that way. But what was crazy about it is after my wife gave me that challenge,
yeah,
I put on my vision board that I was going to be speaking at Afro Tech that next year.
Yeah.
Not knowing that God had other plans.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really great, man. And shout out to Morgan. I saw she checked in at the beginning. I don't know if she's still in.
Yeah.
Definitely shout out to Morgan.
Shout out to Morgan, the boss.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I love how, we have these events like this and they just grow and grow and grow. And cause I was one that I haven't been to Afro Tech before, but it was definitely on my list for this year because I've heard about it, from different people that create apps and, a good friend of mine, Martellus Ben, I know he had been talking about going as well. So, just connecting with different people that way. I also wanted to.
It changed your life.
Yeah. I also wanted
changed your life for real.
To talk to you about the TEDx that you're
yeah.
So you curate them, correct?
Yeah, so I have the license for TEDx Toledo, which is again where I'm from, and so happy to talk about that. So what happened with that was this is way pre Afro Tech, but again, it's one of the nodes that connects to, live event production. So I understood again, when I said that Steve Jobs quote, you can't connect the dots looking forward, you can only connect them looking backwards, is I thought I was doing all this stuff just to, to do stuff for the community, but it was giving me experiences and things that I would ultimately need to be successful at what I'm doing today.
Yeah.
So TEDx happened because, again, I'm from Toledo, Ohio, and it was not a big tech community here in Toledo. And I was frustrated as an entrepreneur and technologist in my community because I'm like, we had people in tech, but there was like no community around it.
Yeah.
And I was a big TED fan. And I'm like, if I can bring that type of energy to Toledo, then I think we can do something special.
Yeah.
Here. And so I was talking to a friend of mine, John Gossier, and, he was telling me about his experience with TED. And while I was on the phone with him, I went to the website and I saw that you could apply for a TEDx license. And I'm like, oh, I'm about to apply. Now, again, not even knowing if I qualified to get this thing, but I applied, and 2 weeks later, they sent me a congratulations email, and I've had the license for, I think, 7 years now.
Oh man, that's great. That's one of the things that's on my, my vision board as well. Is like I want to do that. Recently, I had Pastor Smith that did the TEDx Jacksonville about how murder is normalized in the Black community, and so I just pay attention to a lot of the TEDx's that happen, around the world, and and I had him on my as a guest earlier, and I saw that being part of your background as well.
Yeah.
So definitely wanted to.
Yeah. I mean, the biggest thing about I'm trying to, if the life around me does not reflect what I want it to reflect, I'm just a type of person to build that life around me. And
Yeah.
so, um, I was, I'm in Toledo, Ohio, and I'm managing Afro Tech. And so I'm like, you can do, and the day we live in, like, you can do this from anywhere. Like geography doesn't matter as much, especially right now, everybody at home, or should be, pretty settled. But like, you can do, like, there is no limit on what you can accomplish from wherever you are.
Yeah.
And there are benefits to being in other places, but you can't let it limit you. And so my point in saying that is, like, I've worked really hard, sometimes tripping over opportunities to create the type of ecosystem that I wanted in my life. And so instead of complaining about it, I just figured out a way to, make it happen.
Yeah, and you said a couple of things that I completely agree with. Like things that you do in your life, God will always have them be for a reason. Some
Hmm.
we
Even if you don't know what it is right now.
exactly like I remember growing up, and I have a 4-year-old daughter as well. She's just like me. She doesn't require a lot of sleep, and I don't require much sleep, right? So, but when you're running around with somebody like a Tom Joyner, flying all over the place,
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
not going to get a lot of sleep. But you have
yeah.
to be on point. You have to be super super organized and know how to operate under certain circumstances. And so those are little things that I'll see, and I'm like, that's why, because otherwise
Yeah, for sure.
you wouldn't be able to do it.
For sure.
Uh,
Agree. Completely agree.
yeah, and but yeah, man, I didn't want to hold up too much of your time today. I really, really appreciate you for being on here. And the other thing that I appreciate was, you responded very quickly, and it was like, yeah, okay, just set up the email. You know what I'm saying? Because we hadn't even been connected very long on Instagram, but I really appreciate you for agreeing to be on with me for a period of time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to do the best I can to give back to a community that's given me so much. And it's not about me. It's about I did the podcast, which ultimately led to going to Afrotech, which ultimately led to being the brand manager for Afrotech, because I was trying to figure out a way to get more of us in this industry of technology, more of us seeing representation. Like, I grew up, I'll say this in closing, like, I grew up in a place in the Midwest that, I didn't see, like, black men or women for that matter, like, highly successful in, industries. Like, so I grew up in a place 40 minutes from Detroit, and so if you were doing it, you worked at General Motors,
Yeah,
right, or Jeep.
factory.
But it wasn't until I moved to Atlanta where I saw young black people, men and women, doing it, and they had nothing to do with music, nothing to do with sports, and nothing, so they weren't selling drugs, but they owned real estate,
Yeah,
or they had, franchises or whatever. And so I wanted to give back to a community, to show us representation of people in this industry of technology, that we are out here, and there are people, black people, getting real money in this industry, and there is so much more room for way more of us to take advantage of this.
yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that as well. I talk a lot on my show about the point of it being about exposure. We So many young black people don't know because they haven't been exposed to that. Like we always think that we can be ball players and music artists, things like that, but we don't realize other opportunities we have. So that's why I try to go and speak at a lot of schools and colleges, things like that. About I don't work in I work in sports, but I'm not. I've worked in
Yeah.
radio, but the personality. You know, just seeing that the opportunity being available, that will help them understand.
And they're more likely to be real, way more likely to find success in technology or in business than you are to be an athlete. And I'm not crapping on nobody's goals to be in the league or in the music business. I just want to expose you that you can be the owner of the team,
Absolutely.
also, because, we don't think of ourselves in that way too often.
Right.
And there's not enough of us who desire to be the owner because we don't realize that we even have the option
Yeah.
of one day being being in that seat. So yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you one more thing. So talk about podcasts from a standpoint of monetization, because most people, as you mentioned earlier, we live in a microwave society. So people think, okay, I'm gonna get this podcast and I'm gonna get 1 million downloads and I'm gonna make money from day one. When that's not really the case.
Yeah. So, I have a couple of thoughts on this. One, we just actually today released an episode of Black Tech Green Money with Sherelle Dorsey. And this is such a timely question because we talked about, she runs The Plug, which is a subscription-based news, insights, and data site. And so we had this exact conversation about how to monetize something in the early days before you have like 1 million, downloads or 1 million daily page views and et cetera. And so what you have to do to monetize products is, number one, you have to go super niche and create premium content that people can't get elsewhere or in the flavor that you can give. And then market, you know exactly who you're marketing it to because you built it for that subset of people.
Yeah.
And so if you are, and so instead of creating, I'm gonna just make this up, but instead of creating a real estate podcast that's a very general, how about create a super hyper local real estate podcast that's premium, that goes deep into the insight. So instead of going wide, you go deep.
Yeah.
Right. So you create a hyper local. I'm making this up again. There's a million ways to do this, but you go super hyper local, create a real estate podcast about your community that is designed to help real estate agents, do their job better.
Yeah.
Content that they can't get anywhere else. Or, take another angle. If you're going to be buying a house in the next year in Raleigh, North Carolina, this is a podcast, $50 podcast, download this thing. And you do it in that way. So instead of you trying to reach the masses with this global perspective, reach this specific audience that is not being served. So that's what Sherelle did. And I'm using her as an example because that episode literally came out today. Black Tech Green Money, iTunes, Spotify, AfroTechPodcast.com. And so we literally just had that conversation and the episode is out today. So, and there is no Nielsen for Black tech innovation. Like Nielsen is the, default de facto, distributor of consumer insights and data. So there is nobody from our community that, number one, produces that data, organizes that data, and distributes that data until Sherelle.
Yeah.
And so now you get that data from somebody who's in that community.
Yeah.
And if this data, now she can sell that data to universities.
Yeah.
So she don't need a 1 million daily page views. She's getting paid because universities are paying her because they want to get that content for their students.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that as well. We always want to cast that wide net, but sometimes you just need to go deeper. I look at somebody, Ryan Leslie with Superphone. He's saying that he doesn't need 1 million people to listen to his music. He only needs 10 or 20,000, but they're gonna be, they're gonna buy more frequently, and he can touch them directly as opposed to, being on a major and just having everybody listen to it.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer that we live in a day that people want to be super served. And if you were of age during the 2000s, it was all about like big. And that's where you have the proliferations of Walmarts and, even Amazon in a way. But now you got Etsy where people can just serve their market. Yeah. And you got, smaller boutique. COVID has kind of changed a lot of this. So I'm respectful of people who are, really struggling right now. But pre-COVID, and I ultimately believe we'll go back to, again, a way where smaller entrepreneurs can thrive in this way. It's just a struggle right now because everybody's world is upside down.
Absolutely.
But I believe that people want to be super served. People want bespoke. People want customized. People want unique. And they're willing to pay for that. And so if you can find a way to not, be disheartened because you don't have the amount of followers you want, because you don't have the amount of subscriptions you want, but you can super serve a particular niche, again, to my earlier point, a niche that will be bigger one day, then you'll find the success that you're looking for. Again, I tripped on it with the black tech, situation, because nobody was talking about black tech pre-Afro tech. I just happened to come along in that same wave, and now black tech is, a big thing. And so, but there are so many more out there. To your point, gaming is still early, but people are in it. But there are so many more verticals to do this, and I think it's really about self-exploration, knowing what you're really passionate about, and finding people who agree with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I personally, I try to be an early adopter, just like when it comes to these apps, when it comes to technology. If you can get in early and really, really learn it, then you can learn right along with everybody else. Well, you'll be ahead of it, and learning with the people that are thought leaders as you.
Yeah, it just froze on me.
So I was just saying you can be early on if you do it correctly. But thank you so much for being on the show, my brother. I really appreciate you. And shout out your podcast and anything else that you want to shout out that's coming up.
Black Tech, Green Money Podcast, iTunes, Spotify, or you can go to afrotechpodcast.com. New episodes out every Tuesday. New episode out today. Other than that, Afrotech later this year, virtual this year. So look forward to seeing y'all.
Okay, man. Well, thank you so much, and I definitely want to. Oh, do you have a date for the virtual Afro Tech yet?
I need to catch me slipping. Let's go to afrotech.com. You'll find it.
Got you. So it's still early enough for me to get involved. Perfect.
Yeah, for sure. It's still going to be an incredible experience. It's going to be an incredible experience.
Yeah.
Team's been working really, really hard to make this special for folks.
Absolutely, man. And if you need anything from me, if you need any help on anything, I would love to be involved also. So
appreciate you, Dessie.
Okay, man. You have a great day.
All right, King.
Peace.